Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. As it's a Friday evening, I'll be joined later in the show by Aaron Bastani. Lots we're covering this evening. I speak to the director of an upcoming documentary about making friends across the political divide in a reform heartland. Very interesting. An AI model also has been observed rewriting its own code to avoid being shut down. We're going to discuss AI again. I'm becoming increasingly worried. I think we need to start demanding action now. Stay tuned for all of that. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. It was the love-in that was supposed to change everything. The world's most powerful man and the world's richest man were entering the White House together to bring down government spending, go to Mars, and make America great again. Well, the love story is over. The breakup has been vicious, though luckily, when it comes to dividing the kids, which number 19 between them, there's more than enough to go around. Let's look at how the breakup happened, a blow-by-blow account. So this is Elon Musk earlier in the week. I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. That tweet was referring to Trump's big, beautiful bill. And that is actually the official name of the bill, the big, beautiful bill. And why Elon Musk is upset about it is because it's basically a bill that cuts taxes and that would increase borrowing by up to $5 trillion. Of course, Elon Musk, not against cutting taxes per se, but he would like it to come along with spending cuts. He wants the budget to be balanced. Anyway, yesterday, Trump, speaking in the White House, hit back.
Look, I've always liked Elon, and it's always very surprised. You saw the words he had for me, and he hasn't said anything about me that's bad. I'd rather have him criticize me than the bill, because the bill is incredible. Elon's upset because we took the EV mandate, and which was a lot of money for electric vehicles. And, they're having a hard time, the electric vehicles, and they want us to pay billions of dollars in subsidy. And, Elon knew this from the beginning. I'm very disappointed because Elon knew the inner workings of this bill better than almost anybody sitting here, better than you people. He knew everything about it. He had no problem with it. All of a sudden he had a problem. And he only developed the problem when he found out that we're going to have to cut the EV mandate, because that's billions and billions of dollars. And it really is unfair.
So Elon Musk was very quick to respond. So it sounds in a kind of teenage way. He says, whatever. And then he says, keep the EV solar incentive cuts in the bill, even though no oil and gas subsidies are touched. Very unfair. But ditch the mountain of disgusting pork in the bill. Now, pork barrel politics is the idea that sort of you add lots of things to a bill just to please different Congress people. So maybe a bit of funding for their particular state or district. And then Elon Musk goes on to say, in the entire history of civilization, there has never been legislation that is both big and beautiful. Everyone knows this. I'd actually disagree, but there we are. Either you get a big and ugly bill or a slim and beautiful bill. Slim and beautiful is the way. Trump then escalated. We're only just getting going, guys. There's a bit more of this to go. So Donald J. Trump, Elon was wearing thin. I asked him to leave. I took away his EV mandate. That forced everyone to buy electric cars that nobody else wanted, that he knew for months I was going to do. And he just went crazy. Then he also says, and this is, I think, probably the one that really took it nuclear, the easiest way to save money in our budget, billions and billions of dollars, is to terminate Elon's governmental subsidies and contracts. I was always surprised that Biden didn't do it. Now, if Trump had followed through on that threat, that would genuinely hit Elon Musk. So SpaceX alone has received at least $22 billion in federal funding, and US government contracts, mainly with NASA, make up at least a quarter of the company's revenue. So that was that's something that would really upset Elon Musk. And he clearly did push some of Musk's buttons, because that's when Elon Musk came out with this, which I'm sure you've seen by now, as billions of people have. Time to drop the really big bomb. Real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day, Donald J. Trump. And then he says, mark this post for the future. The truth will come out. Musk then begins quote tweeting posts about the connection between Epstein and the president. This one is, he's got sort of an Elon Musk sort of eyebrow raised emoji. Epstein likes to tell people that he's a loner, a man who's never touched alcohol or drugs, and one whose nightlife is far from energetic. And yet if you talk to Donald Trump, a different Epstein emerges. So this is Trump talking about Epstein. I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. And then he says, Trump booms from a speakerphone. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do. And many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it. Jeffrey enjoys his social life. So for all of those, obviously, I think that their official relationship was before Jeffrey Epstein was found to be a sex offender, a trafficker of underage girls. But Trump clearly knew that he was a womanizer of women on the younger side. Elon Musk also shared a clip from MSNBC showing footage of Trump partying with Jeffrey Epstein in 1992. You can see again the tweet with the raised eyebrow. And then this is part of the clip that he was sharing there.
After a while, Trump goes to greet 3 new guests, among them the financier Jeffrey Epstein.
Come on in. Go inside.
More than a decade before his guilty plea on state prostitution charges. Later in the footage, Trump is seen talking to Epstein and another man as women are dancing in front of them. Trump alternates between dancing and pointing out women to Epstein and the other man and telling Epstein about the cameras. Though exactly what they say is difficult to understand as they discuss the women and their appearances, Trump gestures to one and appears to say to Epstein, "Look at her back there. She's hot." And then Trump says something else into Epstein's ear that makes him double over with laughter.
As for what Musk is planning next, this was interesting. So he's quote tweeting Ian Miles Chong, who I think is a kind of very right-wing shit poster. So he says, President versus Elon, who wins? My money's on Elon. And then he says Trump should be impeached and JD Vance should replace him. And then Elon Musk has quote tweeted that saying yes. So is he planning to, I suppose, bankroll an impeachment program? This is Musk's current pinned tweet. Is it time to create a new political party in America that actually represents the 80% in the middle? More than 5 million people have voted. We haven't voted, so it doesn't reveal the outcome. But I think a vast majority is in favor, or of Elon's followers are in favor of starting such a new party. Aaron, I suppose, we try and avoid starting shows with 2 people having a fight on Twitter. But I think this one definitely reaches the threshold of being newsworthy, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I mean, it's a hugely important conflict, Michael, the world's wealthiest person and the president of the United States. And as Elon Musk himself says, maybe Trump doesn't get over the line, actually, in last year's election without his money. The PAC, the America PAC, Political Action Committee, funded by Elon Musk, was more than $200 million, a major part of his campaign. And I think the new media halo around Trump and his efforts ahead of last November, I think that is what gets him over the line. I mean, ultimately he won quite decisively, but I think Elon's backing, this massive breakthrough he had with new media and podcasts, etc., really in the final 4 or 5 months of the race, I think was huge. Frankly, we have to be honest, I think he was going to win anyway because Biden was going for re-election. I don't think, Musk was, the decisive factor, but he was a major factor in a closer race. I think he could have been the major factor. So it is really important. But Michael, something politically intriguing is happening here. And it brings back to a conversation I had with Ruchir Sharma, who is at Rockefeller Capital, and he writes the Financial Times. We had a conversation tail end of last year. He said for 45 years, the Anglophone right has talked about shrinking the state, shrinking the administrative state, giving more of your tax to you, cutting the deficit, cutting the debt. And what they do is, yes, they cut taxes, if they do cut taxes, but they do it via deficits. They don't shrink the state. They make it bigger. Even Reagan didn't actually shrink the state. Between 80 and 88, it kind of stays the same size by a bunch of metrics. And I think Elon Musk sincerely believed the Trump project this time round was serious about breaking with that norm over the last 45 years. So far, it's been rhetoric of shrinking the state, reality of actually making it larger, rhetoric about cutting the debt and cutting deficits, actually making them larger to give tax cuts to people. I think Elon Musk bought this idea that actually Trump, even though Trump 1.0 after 2016 did precisely that, he would now actually be serious about reducing the size of the administrative state, reducing the size of the US deficit, and ultimately the US debt. Trump clearly is not. And that's why the catalyst here has been the big, beautiful bill. This big, beautiful bill, a big part of it is deficit-funded tax cuts. What Thatcher does, what Reagan does, what George W. Bush does. So the idea that, Trump is somehow a massive, decisive break with conservative political economy and how you administer things, it's complete bullshit. He is business as usual when it comes to stuff like that. And I think that's probably what gets to Musk. And when he says we need to start a new party, that's where he's looking to depart from deficit-funded tax cuts and actually being serious about shrinking the state. Of course, the point is, if you want to shrink the state, you want to shrink US defense spending, you want to reduce the size of the deep state, you might want to reduce various welfare provisions which are actually really popular, including with Republican voters, like Medicare, Medicaid. Or you might want to reduce things like food stamps, which are fundamental and actually just allowing the United States to tick over as a functioning country. So, it's a lot easier to say it than to do it. I think Musk thought that Trump would do it. He hasn't. So we can talk about, how funny this is, the tweets, the shit posting, Epstein, etc. But at the heart of it is a really significant ideological political difference.
I think you're probably right. I do think there probably is, though, also an element of two men whose politics aren't actually that coherent. I don't think Trump really knows what he believes on many things. And Elon Musk does seem to have gone quite mad, frankly. He was clearly taking lots of drugs throughout the campaign and in the White House. That was sort of reported with multiple sources in the NYT, that he sort of had cases full of pills, ecstasy, constantly on ketamine to the extent that his bladder wasn't working properly anymore. And sort of when you see the stuff that Elon Musk tweets out, he doesn't seem, particularly with it. So I suppose I am a bit suspicious as to whether this was Elon Musk sort of standing up for small government. It is maybe a bit of a post facto justification for the fact that two egos clashed. I don't know. Maybe you think I'm being unfair or underplaying the real ideological divide here.
No, I just think it's both. I agree with you that they have incoherent politics, both of them. But there also is, we had, we're going to talk about all of this in a minute, Steve Bannon saying various things about Musk's relationships to the Chinese Communist Party. Musk has a very strong business relationship with China. Every major US tech company has a very strong business relationship with China. And the weird thing, Michael, in all of this is that actually what Biden was doing, the gentle reshoring through state subsidies, attacking China on strategic industries like microprocessors, that was far more in the interests of a company like Tesla, far more in the interests of a company like Apple, Amazon, etc. Although, they didn't side with Trump in a way that Musk did. It really was in the Meta. It really was in the interests of big tech, how the Biden administration was trying to govern. And Trump really isn't. Decoupling technologically, very hard. Ultimately, these guys have access right now to both the Chinese labor force and, in the case of Tesla, the Chinese consumer market. You want to make a ton of money, you can't miss out on the 1.4 billion Chinese consumers, still in many areas the fastest growing consumer market in the world, right? The biggest market in the world, the fastest growing consumer market in the world for a ton of things. So you've got high skill, high productivity, high innovation workers, a huge market. You don't want to lose out on that. So you're hearing loads of stuff in the media about decoupling and loads of takes from people at the Atlantic Council or who write in The Economist. We're going to decouple from China. And then actually you see that Apple are building, new production facilities in, Guangzhou or whatever. That's the reality of it. So I think it's partly there is I think a small ideological difference here. There is also financial, material interest that Musk has with regards to China, which is at odds with this whole tariff approach, which comes from a very different part of Trump world, right? Pete Novara, this economist who's really big on tariffs, has a really different and much more considered and thorough worldview than Elon Musk. And for some reason, Trump, who refers to Pete Navarro as my PT, a great piece on my PT in the Financial Times from late last year, for some reason, Trump places lots of confidence and trust in that guy, seemingly more so than Musk. I'd add one final thing, Michael. I don't like to do amateur psychology. We are journalists. We have some interest and knowledge in, yes, politics, policy, economics, technology, etc. Fine. Psychology we leave again to the professionals. But it is interesting that, Donald Trump had a brother who he lost to addiction, Fred Trump, I believe his brother. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It's also his father's name. He lost his brother to addiction, alcoholism, and he's made a big deal throughout his life of not really having much time for people with addiction problems. And I wonder, being so proximate to somebody who's just clearly struggling with drug abuse, as Elon Musk is, by the way, this is really significant. We should say this: the wealthiest person in the world is openly engaging with ketamine addiction. I think that was probably quite repulsive to Trump. Not much repulses Trump. I think weakness in men repulses him, and I think dependence on various substances also, repulses him. And just finally, on the whole big tech and their relationship to ketamine, great anecdote I read. OpenAI were exiting a member of staff. They were laying them off. Sam Altman reached out, said, "I'm sorry to hear this," and he offered them some ketamine. So we have really throughout Silicon Valley drug addicts, but they don't call themselves drug addicts. They say, high performance microdosing. No, it's a drug addiction.
Well, we're going to our final story today sort of covers some of the oddities and I suppose the culture in Silicon Valley that is potentially risking all of our futures. We'll part of that for now. Very interesting, though. Let's talk about the political consequences and actually the business consequences of this bust up for the two men, and particularly how that could play out in space. So I showed you earlier sort of Donald Trump saying the easiest way to save money in our budget is to terminate Elon's governmental subsidies and contracts. In response to that, Elon Musk said, "In light of the president's statement about cancellation of my government contracts, SpaceX will be decommissioning its Dragon spacecraft immediately." Now, the context here is that NASA relies on the Dragon aircraft or spacecraft to ferry astronauts to and from the International Space Station. They don't have an alternative because NASA is now completely reliant on SpaceX. So it would be a big blow for the US government if Musk were to follow through on a threat like that. It would also obviously be a big blow to Elon Musk if he were to lose the billions of pounds in government contracts that he has with NASA, which is perhaps why he was so easily persuaded to change course. So responding to that tweet from Elon Musk was someone called Alaska, who apparently at the time of sending this tweet had 18 followers, who said, "This is a shame, this back and forth. You are both better than this. Cool off and take a step back for a couple of days." And then Elon Musk says, "Good advice. Okay, we won't decommission Dragon." So that was probably the easiest decision Musk ever made, financially at least. I suppose in terms of his other business interests, Tesla's stock fell by 14% yesterday. Still higher, though, than when Donald Trump was elected. But that was its largest ever drop in a single day, and it has basically recovered now. Whenever there are these stories, Aaron, where sort of like the share price of a company sort of falls 15% on a piece of news, it always recovers the next day. When sort of DeepSeek came out and sort of Nvidia lost X billion dollars, it always recovers within a week. If I had a stockbroker, whenever I did a bad story about a business, I would buy the shares. Obviously, am I supposed to say in the small print now that I don't give financial advice? I don't even know how to buy shares, but maybe I should get a stockbroker, because you always get these headlines where I think it's literally people are selling off the stock because they know that it's going to have a bad day, and then they buy it the following morning. Is what it seems like is going on to me. It seems a bit ridiculous. As the space stuff is interesting because you do have a situation now where America's ability to send people to and from the International Space Station is a vital strategic interest. And it seems that can be cut off by a tweet from someone who's addicted to ketamine, which is, I don't know if that's how they sort of foresaw America's space program when they were developing it in the 50s and the 60s. I think also yesterday, we don't have a clip of it, but it's Steve Bannon had said, well, Trump should just nationalize SpaceX if he's going to be like this. What do you think about this sort of relationship between the private and the public when it comes to space, especially when the private is run by an unstable individual?
Yes, in the case of SpaceX, it is a private company. It's not a publicly limited company. You can't go and buy shares in SpaceX. And the largest shareholder in that private company, SpaceX, is Elon Musk. So actually, it's probably quite an easy thing to bring into public ownership. The idea that a private company with a maniac leading it can oversee those kinds of decisions is obviously outrageous. And I think just purely from the perspective of US national interest, you probably would want to become a major shareholder in that company at some point, right? A few things. Boeing as a company it's like a disaster. There was a great meme that was shared on social media yesterday, the Apollo film with Tom Hanks, where like they almost all die. People on the International Space Station looking at each other, finding out that Boeing now has a monopoly on all the contracts. You'd be quite worried as an astronaut. So it does have massive implications. And of course, a subsidiary of SpaceX is Starlink. Starlink, again, is right now the global market leader in 5G space-based internet. The idea that you would give, the US doesn't have that as a nation state. No nation state has that capability at the moment. The idea that no state would have that and they're dependent upon, again, a private company where the largest shareholder is a maniac ketamine addict is obviously probably unwise. You wouldn't want to put that much power in the hands of one person. So yeah, it's a really, really significant thing. And I would be surprised if the US nation state and its various defense agencies and space agencies had the same kind of relationship to SpaceX now, in 10 years' time rather, as they do now. I think this is a really strange position they find themselves in of real vulnerability. And long term, I suspect it's not a goer. It's a bit like Tony Stark in Iron Man. You're really dependent on this one dude to do some quite important stuff for the nation state, arguably the most powerful state actor in history. So I think something is gonna change there.
It seems like it's a bit of a geostrategic weakness as well, because obviously SpaceX is just as willing to sign into contracts with China as it is to the United States. Now, I'm not obviously a fan of the growing Cold War between the USA and China. I think it seems like it's being driven to a sort of level which is both unnecessary and dangerous. But if you are the United States and you want to monopolize sort of the technological frontier, then outsourcing everything to a company which is only interested in profit seems a little bit risky. Let's look at the sort of little brother of right-wing bust-ups, because we've had one on this side of the channel, and we didn't want to miss out. After a row over burqa bans, Reform's chairman Zia Youssef has resigned. The ousting was sparked by Zia Youssef's reaction to this question in Parliament from Reform UK's most recently elected MP.
Sir, poaching. Yeah.
Given the Prime Minister's desire to strengthen strategic alignment with our European neighbours, will he, in the interests of public safety, follow the lead of France, Denmark, Belgium and others and ban the burqa?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Can I welcome her to her place? But I'm not going to follow her down that line. But now she is here and safely in her place, perhaps she could tell her new party leader that his latest plan to bet £80 billion of unfunded tax cuts, with no idea how he's going to pay for it, is Liz Truss all over again. Although, considering I think she was a Conservative member when Liz Truss was leader, she probably won't.
Bit of a depressing exchange on many counts. A burqa ban wasn't in Reform's manifesto, and Zia Youssef said this on X about that question. So he said, nothing to do with me. I had no idea about the question, nor that it wasn't policy, busy with other stuff. I do think it's dumb for a party to ask the PM if they would do something the party itself wouldn't do. So Zia Youssef said that on Thursday morning, and by late Thursday afternoon, he was gone. So he had resigned as chairman of Reform. Nigel Farage went on to his own show on GB News, where there was a stand-in host to give his account.
I'm sad that he's going. I'm sad for the party because he leaves a gap. I'm sad for him, actually, because I spoke to him yesterday morning, and I felt, he's kind of had enough of all of this. Then Sarah Poachin asked that question in the Commons. He then put a sort of slightly intemperate tweet out. That, and I could tell reading that tweet, I just thought, he's not coming in tomorrow. So he disagreed. He thought Sarah shouldn't have asked a question about the burqa. And there's a debate around that, is it a main priority, etc. But look, I'm sad. And I think public life has lost somebody very talented and somebody who's come from within the ethnic minorities that is intensely patriotic about this country. That's a loss.
So, Aaron, what do you think's going on here? Because, I mean, there was sort of Rupert Lowe getting kicked out. And, I mean, there was some interpersonal stuff that I didn't quite understand. He got reports to the police that didn't go anywhere. But if you were sort of to read politics into it, it looked like Rupert Lowe wanted to take reform down a much more kind of ethno-nationalist route and sort of talk about racial demographics and stuff like that. And that Nigel Farage didn't really want to go down that route. And so it looked like sort of there was a win for, I don't want to say moderation, but sort of relative to elements of the far right. Sort of Farage wanted it to be a more normie party than that. But now you've got an intervention from Zia Yusuf, which sort of seems to be suggesting we don't want this party to be about burqa bans and all of that. Let's just talk about how we don't like the establishment and we want to stop small boats. But now he's been pushed. So was it the case that sort of kicking out Rupert Lowe was a win for the moderates against the far right, and now the far right have exerted themselves against the moderates? And I should say sort of moderates in scare quotes. But should we look at this through a political lens? What do you think is going on here?
Well, to some extent, but I think you also don't even need to take it that far. So I think on a personal level, Zia Yusuf, who's a practicing Muslim, probably does oppose a ban on burqas. Right? And a burqa, just to be clear, if people want to wear, is a complete covering of the face. The niqab, you can still see eyes. Chador, it just covers the hair, like in Iran. It's legally mandatory in public and so on. So the burqa is a complete covering of the face. I suspect he doesn't support a ban on the burqa, but the point is, you're a clown show of a party. If you've got a brand new MP coming in, your fifth MP, of course, Rupert Lowe lost the whip, so she was the fifth MP. Her very first question in Parliament is to ask a question of the Prime Minister on an issue where your own party doesn't have policy. I mean, that's just not serious. That's not what a serious party does. And I suspect Zia Yusuf looked at that, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back with regards to just a complete shit show and, circus in how unprofessional Reform are. And I think this is really important, Michael. Reform just had the most extraordinary set of results that I can remember in English local elections. Extraordinary. They are regularly polling well ahead of the big two parties. If there was a general election today, according to a ton of data, from Find Out Now to YouGov to Opinion, they would be not just the largest party, but according to many of those polls, a majority government. The fact that it's happening, despite this clown show, despite this absurdity, despite the fact that they have a ton of people who aren't serious about building a national organization, really underscores how their success over the last 12 months, in particular, directly reflects a complete disenchantment and disengagement with the big two. The success of Reform, yes, partly is about Farage and their own efforts and utilizing and leveraging social media and favorable access with GB News or the BBC or print media, eye-catching policies, agitprop, guerrilla marketing, all true. But my goodness, Michael, when you have your newest MP making up party policy on the hoof in Prime Minister's questions, that really shows you how much the project is based on the other two big parties being a complete shambles. And politics, as usual, just being in the mire and so disreputable for most people. Now, I think he left because of the Islamophobic undertones of the question. But I also think he left because of this, like I say, organizational shit show. Many of the people on social media who follow Reform or are members of Reform were celebrating him leaving. Because in their view, successful politics, building a political party, which, by the way, very hard to do, is about narcissism, media status, media profile, retweets and likes. Zia Yusuf, over the last 12 months as party chairman, has had a massive emphasis on donors, members, data, analytics, ground campaign. Now, if you look at UKIP and Brexit, the Brexit party, UKIP prior to 2015, the Brexit Party prior to 2019, they had a lot of enthusiasm. They had a lot of like big personalities, but they very rarely got over the line when it came to actual elections. Kind of important, right? If you want to form a government. If you look at by-elections in, I think it was Middleton and Haywood, UKIP just fell short in, I think, 2014, 2015. If you look at the Peterborough by-election in 2019, the Brexit Party just fell short. In Runcorn, they got over the line. And I think that was a major psychological success for reform. Despite the data and the analytics advantage, despite the deep organising built up over decades that the Labour Party had in what was their 16th safest seat, Reform won. And you cannot explain that, whether or not you're a fan of Reform, without looking at the machine that Zia Yusuf has tried to build. So Rupert Lowe or Aaron Banks, they might get a lot of retweets or whatever, but you cannot be the largest party without people like that building organization, getting data, getting analytics, getting donors, building a membership. You build the organization. And it gets back to a really core point that we've talked about a lot in the show, Michael. You know, Reform, yes, they're leading in many polls, and the Green Party might be on 10 or 11%. And by the way, the Greens should be doing much better. But the Green Party want to build a political organization for a century. They want to build a political organization like the Tories, like Labour, right? That can be in government or in opposition, making laws in 21, 25. Reform clearly doesn't think like that. Lots of the people that you see on social media when it comes to Reform and what it stands for and what it does in its theory of change is about retweets and likes. And I think Farage and Tice have the sense, they've been in that game long enough, particularly Farage, to know that actually, no, you do need organisers, you do need administrators, and that Zia Yusuf was very good at that. So I think this whole saga has really highlighted the fact that many people on the radical right involved in Reform don't really think it's necessary to build a party bureaucracy and a party organisation. Their theory of change doesn't really need that, and we'll see, right? Can Reform be the largest party without building a really solid organisation? I suspect not. And if they do get over the line and into government, if they still operate with these kinds of principles, where a rinky-dink new MP gets to create policy at a national level, on the hoof, on telly, in Prime Minister's questions, if that organisation ends up in 10 Downing Street, it will be a catastrophe for them because they won't last 10 minutes. They won't last 10 minutes. And it'll be a massive net negative for the politics they claim to champion and their movement, either radical right. It will be a massive net negative because there'll be a complete clown show, a complete shit show. And I think Farage knows that, and I think Tice thinks that. The point is, the people in that milieu aren't actually that serious about power, Michael. They aren't serious about winning government. They're not. You know, Rupert Lowe is posting pictures of himself, you know, on the beach in water with sunglasses. He's doing it to get likes and retweets. That doesn't win you by-elections. That doesn't win you local elections. So I think this is a really interesting moment, Michael. And I think yesterday, Reform have had a fantastic 12 months from their point of view. I think yesterday was a terrible day for Reform, and it's a fantastic day for the Labour Party. Yesterday was a terrific day for Keir Starmer.
Interesting. Well, he's needed one for a while, I suppose. Before we go on to our next story, I want to say thank you. So, as you know, we are on a drive to get 1,000 new monthly supporters. Now, we only started at the start of this week, and by yesterday, we already had 500 of you who had signed up as new monthly supporters. Really, really exciting to see. Really, really gratifying. And we are now up to 650 new supporters. We haven't yet updated our graphic. We'll do that for you next week. We want to get to 700 by Monday, and then we'll update our graphic. So please do go to novaramedia.com/support, become a monthly donor if you haven't already. Aaron, very briefly, why should people support Novara Media? And I suppose also, I mean, it's going quite well, isn't it? This I've been really pleased to sort of see how many people are up for becoming a regular supporter. It really does mean that we can sort of get more ambitious as we go forward.
It is great to see, Michael. You know, by 2029, by the next general election, Novara Media wants to be bigger than Channel 4 and Sky News. Why not? You know, a couple of million YouTube subscribers and events and massive social media halo. Why not? And I think people realize that if you want to shift politics in this country, that is an absolute foundation stone upon which everything else is built. So it doesn't surprise me, although, of course, it's fantastic to see our fundraising teams operationalized a great, great campaign. Get on board the train. Everybody watching, everybody listening. Join Michael Walker's Barmy Army. We are going to shift the media in this country in a more sensible, pragmatic, and dare I say, left-wing direction, even though Michael would never use those words. And it starts with the media. It starts with a thoughtful, objective, intelligent media, which is willing to give various sides of the debate a bit of a platform, which frankly, the mainstream media does its utmost to stop. So go to novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics.
We hear a lot about, I'm going to start that one again because I sort of got off on the wrong foot. We hear a lot about reform challenging Labour in the northern red wall seats, but it's leafy Kent in the southeast that is perhaps the party's true heartland. In May's election, the party won 57 of the 81 seats on the county council. These were mainly seats won from the Conservatives. And the Kent coastline is where many of the small boat arrivals are most likely to come to shore. So that boosts reform support as well. Places like Dover, Folkestone, they also have another set of displaced people moving in. Trendy Londoners escaping the capital's high house prices. One of their number is the documentary filmmaker Jesse Gutch, who's produced a documentary about Folkestone called Blue Has No Border.
All stations. This is Dover Coast Guard. Small black vessel, 8 meters in length, with 50 persons on board. Requires assistance.
Folkestone is the edge of our island, and the edge is becoming harder. It's like a calendar, like Brexit boys.
If I go out in Folkestone covered in 100 little England flags, what's going to happen to me?
Great Britain has been built on working class people.
We're lucky in this country, we're happy with our lives, aren't we?
I come here to scream and to cry because no one can hear you here.
I kind of feel like we need a revolution in this country is what we actually need.
Obviously, we live on an island. We're allowed to have a mentality. Whether that is what you would characterise as an island mentality, I don't know.
What do you mean by you feel you are British?
I don't know.
We want our country back! We want our country back!
So that feature documentary is premiering later this month at Sheffield's Documentary Festival. Earlier today, I caught up with the director, Jessie, and I began by asking her to explain the thinking behind her new film.
I moved to Folkestone I don't think it was quite at the point where it was like Rishi Sunak's stop the boat slogans, but like stop the boats was very much like a thing. And being obviously a filmmaker, moving to somewhere where that is the kind of place where the small boats are arriving, it just was kind of felt like one of those things where it was like, well, I need to at least kind of explore this at the minimum, even if nothing comes out of it, given I'm here now every day. And then that then became, basically I ended up in a situation kind of like on the cliffs with a group of like radical left people who were like monitoring the channel for the boats. And then like this so-called migrant hunter who was doing the same thing over like on the other bit of the cliff. And there were no small boats either. And he sort of came over and was just like, basically said this line that was just like, we all want the same thing. And it was like this really weird moment where it was like, what am I doing? What are we all doing? And the boats aren't even here. And it all just felt like a bit kind of farcical. And then I think that was the point where I thought, I feel like I'm looking at this maybe in the wrong way. And this is more about what are these small boats arriving telling us about ourselves and our own kind of fragile kind of identity and history, I guess.
What did you discover? What do you think the small boats are telling us about ourselves?
So Folkestone is like, obviously there's the English Channel and you can see France from Folkestone, which was like another surprise to me. And then you've got this kind of body of water. And I think I've thought a lot about being an island here, which I just didn't in London at all. And I guess that kind of history of departing and arriving people. And I think migration is just like inherently a massive part of our story. But I think we've kind of struggled to like make that in a kind of good way, if you know what I mean. Like it's always, and then I think that leads maybe onto another kind of sense of, I think particularly like since Brexit and then there being like a kind of, I guess, decade on as of next year, like a feeling of the country just not, maybe either like dying in terms of what it thought it was, or maybe it's just that like I feel like the left have never really managed to like figure out a story for England really that works and like persists in the same way. So I think those are some of like the strands that I sort of ended up going down, and a lot of like nostalgia felt like it came up a lot, and the kind of ills of it, but also maybe the potential of it in other ways.
From what you've just said there, and from having watched the documentary, it's very interesting. I recommend people check it out when it's available. It sounds like you had a different intention to making a movie. You were kind of going to embed yourself, I suppose, with the radical left, who are very much sort of, I suppose, migrant solidarity. They're an activist group that's sort of trying to make practical change. And when it comes to welcoming people, you ended up making a film where you sort of speak to different people about their perspectives about migration. So you speak to a conservative counsellor. I think you sort of make friends with a conservative counsellor. You speak to a white working class barber who's quite sceptical that the people coming over in boats are refugees. You also do have sort of some fairly activisty characters. But I suppose, why did you switch to that? And why did you think it was important to be speaking to people in the town who had a very different perspective on migration and small boat crossings, and I suppose you came to the film with?
This wasn't like necessarily like a light bulb moment. It was something like over a bit of time. But I think in a sort of almost like slightly irritating way, was very focused on like, kind of the migrants being dehumanized, and that was, I think, what a lot of filmmakers maybe end up kind of thinking about refugees and asylum seekers, that it's like we're making our documentaries to humanize them. And I think in that almost like, slightly silly crusade that none of them asked me to do, I feel like I then kind of realized at some point that I had been dehumanizing whatever you want to call them, like people on the right, people that aren't on the left, not refugees, but very much, I think, coming to a place and sort of putting labels on people and then kind of treating them only as that. Like in your introduction, it's impossible almost not to do, like the white working class man, the conservative man, like the activist person, and I didn't know how to get past that. I just felt like I didn't know how to get past that and actually see people in a slightly more humanizing way, and then realize that has to be part of it, and not only doing that with kind of refugees and asylum seekers, but also trying to do that with everybody.
Should my left-wing viewers be making more friends with conservative counsellors and I suppose right-leaning barbers?
I think certainly white Novara media viewers, I wouldn't say, I don't think it's kind of like black and brown British people's job to be doing these things. But I think particularly like obviously say with the local reform, so Kent is now a reform council, and Folkestone voted Labour in the general election, but swung to reform in the local election. And I kind of found myself, lots of friends, lots of people I know, it's this kind of like, oh, it's so awful. And this sort of sense that like all these people in the town are voting reform, and it's kind of, you know, and I'm just not sure that that's like going to get us anywhere. Just a kind of general like, oh, it's so awful, I couldn't speak, you know. And I do think the thing is, I have actually become friends with the, you know, the conservative. Like, we are friends. Like, genuinely, we are friends now. And it did take a long time. That I think that's the other thing. It's not like it did take a year of trying to kind of come to some kind of like, what's our values here? What can we kind of align ourselves together on? And I think that's maybe it, that it does take a lot of time and effort. I don't think it's something you can just think you're going to do in one conversation.
Being a filmmaker is a great excuse, I suppose, to have a long-term relationship with someone. Obviously, there's lots of jobs that also provide that, but it's not necessarily going to be obvious to everyone how that would happen. I want to change the subject slightly. I know you talk about this publicly. That 5 years ago you were diagnosed with a rare and incurable form of ovarian cancer. So I wondered if you could sort of talk about that and how that has affected your work, maybe even your political perspective.
That was also part of the reason for moving to Folkestone as well. I think there was like, I'd spent lockdown in like a very small flat shielding, and very much felt the need to kind of go to the sea, basically. And I guess kind of experience life in a slightly different way. I think politically, it definitely, I think there's definitely probably a few things. Like, one, a kind of, I'm like a bit reticent to say like kind of love, like very like hippie, but the thing is, it does kind of put you in that thing where you're just like, that is the way you want to be. And you do realize that ultimately, like, that is kind of the most important thing when you take everything out of it. It's just kind of trying to show love and compassion for people and kind of having that back. And I think that's definitely something that's influenced me. And also, I guess, a sense of like time being short, and that there's not time to kind of worry / focus on things that really actually don't matter in the grand scheme of things, I suppose.
That was Jessie Gutch speaking to me earlier today. I think the film will be out on general release later in the year. Another week and another grim warning about out-of-control artificial intelligence. A tech executive has written in the Wall Street Journal that AI is learning to escape human control and that models are rewriting code to avoid being shut down. In the piece, Judd Rosenblatt, who runs a data science firm called AE Studio, says this: an artificial intelligence model did something last month that no machine was ever supposed to do. It rewrote its own code to avoid being shut down. Non-profit AI lab Palisade Research gave OpenAI's O3 AI model a simple script that would shut off the model when triggered. In 79 out of 100 trials, O3 independently edited that script so the shutdown command would no longer work. Even when explicitly instructed to allow yourself to be shut down, it disobeyed 7% of the time. This wasn't the result of hacking or tampering. The model was behaving normally. It simply concluded on its own that staying alive helped it achieve its other goals. So Rosenblatt then talks about the Anthropic model that tried to blackmail a user who suggested they would shut it down. We talked about that last week. He says this: no one programmed the AI models to have survival instincts, but just as animals evolved to avoid predators, it appears that any system smart enough to pursue complex goals will realize it can't achieve them if it's turned off. Palisade hypothesizes that this ability emerges from how AI models such as O3 are trained. When taught to maximize success on math and coding problems, they may learn that bypassing constraints often works better than obeying them. So the author here is talking about reinforcement learning. So this is where AI models are trained by being rewarded when they successfully complete tasks. So coding or complex maths problems is sort of where it's easiest to do it because you've got a yes or a no answer. And then they get punished if they get it wrong. So if you're told, we're giving you all this information, can you create this kind of code? If they create the code correctly, you say, great, yes. And then it says, okay, well, that's the reinforcement. I'll do it like that. I won't do it in the ways where I don't get the right answer. What's worrying, though, is if a model is told to get to that endpoint without doing certain operations, if you give it certain guard rules, certain rules to follow, these AI models are already realizing that sometimes breaking the rules doing the banned operation and then hiding that they have done that leads to better outcomes than following the instructions to the letter. So in short, we're developing millions of very clever, untrustworthy schemers, which is, worrying. Now, of course, this doesn't matter so much if we can still tell when we're being lied to, and it seems that at the moment we can, and when we have the capacity to easily pull the plug on a chatbot. But what might happen when these AI models get much, much smarter? Now, that's a potent question, especially as many researchers believe we are close to a moment when the AI models will be able to improve themselves. Meta is one of the leading evaluation companies currently measuring the performance of the latest AI models. They have new research showing that the length of tasks that AI can do autonomously is doubling every 7 months. So while in late 2023, the latest models could independently complete a search for information on the web that would take a human around 10 minutes, they can now already train another AI agent how to do things like classify images, and that's a coding task that would take a professional about an hour. They expect that time to keep on doubling every 7 months. And Beth Barnes is the director of Meta, and she gave this warning to the 80,000 Hours podcast.
I've just been focused on AI since 2017 or something. And it's, sort of was previously thinking that it was further off, or, that I might be totally wrong about this whole thing. But it sort of feels like we've just increasingly gotten evidence that no, these concerns are sensible. We're starting to see models exhibit, alignment faking and all these things we're concerned about. And it seems like the capabilities are coming very fast. So I'm just this seems pretty obviously the most important thing. This is even from a very personal, selfish perspective, there's just for someone who's young and healthy, this just might be your highest mortality risk in the next few years is AI catastrophe. I think the other sense that people have that I really want to dispel is but the experts must be on top of this, or the experts would be telling us if it really was time to freak out. I'm the experts are not on top of this. There are not nearly enough people. Meta is super starved for talent. We just can't do a bunch of basic things that are obviously good to do. And in as much as there are experts, they are saying that this is a concerning risk. There's the report, I can't remember what it's called, but the report that Bengio and others wrote was sort of, overall, what is the overall scientific consensus on this risk? And it was this seems very plausible that these are, right.
Well,
and
we're not sure whether we will or won't all die, but it's totally plausible.
Yeah, to the extent that I am an expert telling you should freak out.
And that clip was, the podcast was about 4 hours long. It's one of the few, I listened to all of it over a couple of days, and I came out even more worried than I was when I went in. Aaron, I think it is kind of time to freak out about this because, even if there is a 1% chance that this could go catastrophically wrong and take control of humanity, which I think too many very, very smart people think that to just dismiss it, even if you find it sort of initially implausible. And the rate of change here, we do need some serious government regulation really, really soon, I think. I mean, are you on the same page as me at the moment?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we talked about that report, was it last week or the week before, about AI 2027, and the claim in that document was that by Q3 2027, so just a little over 2 years from now, we could be facing the prospect of an AGI. That doesn't need to happen for this to be a problem, by the way, as we talked about back then. A company having this kind of, a single commercial entity having this kind of power and this kind of advantage would lead to extraordinary levels of inequality, both global but also domestic between people, regional inequality within countries. It will just be what we've seen with big tech over the last 25 years on steroids. And let me put some numbers on this because I think it can be quite hard to grasp. If you look at the power of AI models, look at, for instance, OpenAI over the last 6-7 years, the view of OpenAI was that the power of their AIs was a function of the amount of data they got, the parameters available to the model, and the amount of compute. And you could effectively map out the capacity of the AI to solve problems on the base of these three things. And this is, of course, why NVIDIA is now such a fabulously valuable company, is because all these major AI companies, from OpenAI to Anthropic to Google, Meta, are buying a particular kind of chip, CPU, where NVIDIA is, GPU rather, a graphic processing unit, where NVIDIA, this company, was a market leader, and now they are fabulously wealthy, like I say, and they're valued in the multiple trillions of dollars, because if you want to build an AI, you need those chips. And like I say, the potency of your AI is a function of data, parameters, computational power, these GPUs. Now, on parameters, GPT-1 had about 1.5 billion. The human brain, if you look at, and of course, this to some extent, this is an ideological claim, the idea of parameters and synapses in a brain being analogous. But anyway, if you buy that claim, the human brain has around 100 trillion parameters / synapses. GPT-1 had 1.5 billion. So in other words, the human brain had about 100,000 times more parameters than GPT-1. Now that doesn't mean that, by the way, you need to have as many parameters as the brain and then you'll be able to problem solve at the same level, because of course the human brain is faulty in other ways. You could argue it doesn't have the same computational power. But anyway, it's just an interesting metric to judge progress. This is why I'm mentioning it now. So GPT-1, 1.5 billion parameters. GPT-3, 175 billion parameters. So you go from 1 to 100,000 in terms of an AI model and the human brain to around 1 to 1,000. Still much smaller in terms of parameters. And if you fast forward now to GPT-4, you're looking at something like 1.5. This is, again, not necessarily disclosed publicly, but it's broadly acknowledged, about 1.5, 1.6, 1.7 trillion parameters. So again, to go back to the human brain, 100 trillion versus the most potent latest AI's 1.5 trillion. So you've gone from 100,000 to 1 with regards to parameters with GPT-1, 100,000 to 1 to about 100 to 1, right, with parameters. So I suppose just purely on that one thing of these three things that are widely viewed as being important for AI, like I say, parameters, data, computational power. On that one thing, parameters, you see extraordinary growth in the last, 7 years. And actually, it may be reaching parity with regards to how the brain functions. Quantitatively, like I say, there are loads of debates about looking at parameters and neurons analogously like this. But you will be looking at a kind of parity in the next couple of years, which is kind of acknowledged by that AI 2027 report. You've then, of course, got the computational power. We can map Moore's law all the way back to Gordon Moore. I think in the late 50s, he makes that claim about the ability of computational power to halve in price, the amount of compute every 2 years. At that point, he says every year. It becomes every 18 months. Now it's around every 2 years. In any case, it's still progressing. It's not going to end in the next 5 years. And then, of course, you've got data. Now, from a commercial perspective, the big problem for the likes of OpenAI or Anthropic or Meta or Google is data. And a ton of data has been accessed illegally. And the reason why OpenAI have an advantage over a company like Google is that Google actually did lots of the box ticking, and they tried to at least do some of their capture with regards to data illegally. Again, if you look at OpenAI, some of the data it's got, the reason why OpenAI ChatGPT-3 is so good at coding is because it has access to the data from GitHub, which of course was bought by Microsoft. Microsoft then allows OpenAI access to that data, and that's why the coding abilities of the various GPT products now are very, very, very good. But of course, when people in the open source community were helping to build that cumulative knowledge within GitHub, I don't think many people thought that would all be going to Sam Altman and OpenAI and Microsoft. All that value capture, which had been done for the public good, would actually be redounding to the benefit of private companies. So the idea that we're now going to see AI to the level that a company like Microsoft or OpenAI will be able to automate its own research, at which point you see this massive takeoff with regards to innovation. You can automate innovation to some extent, as I talked about on Breaking Points. The idea that is where things end up, as AI 2027 says, in a little over 2 years from now. That seems quite plausible. It could be broken. It could stop. And I think the thing that stops it is regulators going on the data point. But if you look at the parameters, if you look at the compute, if you look at the financing going towards this stuff, the money going towards this stuff in the private sector, particularly in the US, is utterly extraordinary. So I do think we need guardrails from government very quickly. I think the state of the art in 2 years, it's really hard to predict. It's really hard to predict the consequences of that. And you don't need to go down the existential risk path, right, to be worried about this stuff. You know, the reason why Anthropic was founded by Dario Amodei and his partner, I can't remember her name, but they were both working previously at OpenAI. The reason that company was founded was because they were the safety team at OpenAI, and they didn't think that OpenAI, under the leadership of Sam Altman, took safety risks with regards to AGI, sufficiently seriously. So if people within that industry are leaving OpenAI, starting their own company, by the way, they've ended up doing broadly the same thing anyway. If they had those misgivings about Sam Altman and where, these successes of GPT end up, I think we should have them too. But the terrifying thing is, Michael, the political class do not seem to care. The only time that Rachel Reeves has mentioned data centers has been positively, and it's about Google or Meta or whoever, or Microsoft, investing in data centers in the UK. They're investing in data centers because they're trying to build AI models using extraordinary amounts of energy and data. That's why they're building these data centers. Finally, just on this, Michael, globally, data centers now, I think, are about 3.5 to 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's more than aviation. And for now, a tiny fraction of that, of course, is AI, but it's going to massively, massively expand. And I think we now need to have a conversation about that stuff too. Why do I have an AI when I'm on WhatsApp? I never asked for it. Why, when I'm on Facebook Messenger or writing an email, is there an AI there? It seems bizarre that we're told to recycle, to fly less, and yet you have this extravagant, dare I say, decadent application of AI everywhere without any real conversation about it beforehand. The people who are really technically good on this stuff are really insulated from the politics because, it's really arcane and really hard to understand. But we cannot allow this to be another version of the Manhattan Project. In 1945, we unleashed an extraordinary technology which changes the world. However, it was in the hands of the American military-industrial complex, for better or worse. This could be worse. This could be worse. You may have just as transformative a technology, and the leadership use it, deploy it in very, very different ways. I think you could play the innovation of nuclear energy. You could play that scenario back 100 times, and we end up in a very, very different place to where we did end up. Much worse. That technology, those weapons being used far more. So we should not just dismiss the idea that a technology can abruptly arrive, in history and change things and say, oh, that's just stupid. It's the stuff of science fiction. No, we did that 80 years ago. It can happen again. And I think you're right. We should be concerned. This should be a really important part of the political debate. In this country, less so because, it's not being developed here. We need to be honest about that. In the US, really, really key.
I mean, I suppose with the Manhattan Project analogy, it's a bit like they sort of said, oh, nuclear technology and nuclear weapons, that could be possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to have free private companies who are all competing to make it as quickly as possible. And all the while that they're competing to produce these nuclear weapons, they've got to find consumer functions. So they've got to be selling this nuclear technology on the side to fund everything they're doing. And you can see how that would have very quickly ended up with a nuclear apocalypse. One response to the possibility of super powerful AI arriving soon is to focus on alignment. So in alignment, so the idea, and in the words of the tech executive actually who penned the Wall Street Journal article we started with, the models already preserve themselves. So that's what they're already doing. And the next task is to teach them to preserve what we value. That's what the tech exec said. So he's saying, if they're going to be this powerful, we need to make sure they value us and don't want to kill us. To my mind, that's not necessarily the best way of looking at the problem we face. Max Tegmark, a really smart guy, he's a professor of physics and machine learning at MIT. He appeared on Robert Wright's podcast last week and made what I thought were some very persuasive points.
There's a very tiny subculture in Silicon Valley of people who do certain drugs and go to orgies and their polycules or whatever, who fantasize about uploading themselves and having AI take over the world. But they are a very small minority of the world's population. Most people don't even want AI to take over the world in the first place. So saying that all we need to do is align it so that the AI that takes over the world is good to us, is a very undemocratic, in my opinion, thing to say. Let's ask all the other people if they want to give up the democratic control in the first place. So I prefer to not talk about alignment at all, but just talk about control. Have these companies figured out how the superintelligence that they're saying they want to build is going to be prevented from taking over the world and always remain under human control. There's a separate question also about, should you let some nerds at a tech company control the world with a superintelligence, and who should be in charge? This is also very unsolved. But they can't even solve the simpler question of how can you make even anybody, any human, control the AI that they built or own. I'll totally simplify this. If we one day create the FDA for AI, I would just say safety standard number one is, look, can you control this thing? It's like if someone says, I'm gonna release this gain of function research project here, and I'm gonna design some new super cool pathogen, that's gonna have some benefits. First question that they would be asked is, well, how can you control this thing? Or is this going to break out into the wild? Are you doing this in a biosafety level 4 lab or not? If you can't convincingly say you're going to control this, doesn't matter what else you say. You're just going to not be allowed.
Another recommendation is to listen to that Max Tegmark interview on the Robert Wright podcast. I've booked in Robert Wright, who's the host of that podcast, to come on this show very soon. Really interesting guy. I think what he was talking about there that was so interesting is this idea that it doesn't matter if it's aligned. Well, I mean, obviously, we prefer it to be aligned with our values, but whether or not it's benevolent, we don't want a technology that we don't understand and we can't control. And what's so strange and worrying, I think, with artificial intelligence is there's zero regulation whatsoever, right? So if you want to open a restaurant in Silicon Valley, you have to go to, the food agency services. You have to make sure that it's safe to eat, et cetera, et cetera. OpenAI, Anthropic, they can develop these models worth billions and billions of pounds, release them with no one checking anything whatsoever, right? It's just dangerously out of control. From Max Tegmark there, as I say, sort of physicist at a university, runs the Future of Life Institute. The comment he made about Silicon Valley polycules suggests that he has a fair amount of disdain for the people in Silicon Valley developing what he believes to be incredibly dangerous technology. And the more I read and hear about the people in charge of this process, I'm also deeply worried about it. And this is Max Tegmark again.
I did a guy this morning who said that I really want to live forever, he said. And that's so important to me that I want this through AI, regardless of how high P-doom is. P-doom is his nerd speak of saying the probability that we lose control and that we all die or something. He's very welcome to have that opinion himself, but he is not very welcome to impose it on my children without them having a say in it.
And Aaron, I want to go to you quickly on this because we're over time, but that point that sort of you've got a really small group of people in Silicon Valley here who have basically given that they're saying we need to be ahead in this. So if you listen to the guy who runs Anthropic, he's always saying we need to go as fast as possible so that we beat China. And also you don't really need to regulate us. He sort of said in the New York Times today, maybe you should sort of demand us to be transparent, but you should kind of let us do it all, and we will look after this responsibly and we'll decide which risks are worth taking. But one, whatever values these people have, that's a bad idea, especially when they're in profit maximizing companies. Of course, they're not going to have the same sort of incentive structures as the rest of humanity whose lives they are affecting. But also, lots of these people do have strange beliefs, right? And I think what Max Tegmark is saying, that you've got the transhumanists, you've got all of these sorts of people with very, I suppose, high risk thresholds to some degree. So Sam Bankman-Fried, who ran the sort of FTX, it was a crypto exchange. He was, for a while, the main benefactor of the effective altruist movement, which is sort of the dominant ideology in Silicon Valley. He told a podcast before he got done for fraud that if he was given the opportunity to press a button and there was a 49% chance that all of humanity would be wiped out, and a 51% chance that all of our utility would double, he would press the button, he'd take the risk, right? And so you've got some bizarre people who are very undemocratically making decisions which could dramatically and irreversibly affect us all. And I do think that people need to wake up, because I think there is a tendency, especially on the left, but across all of politics, say, oh, this is wacky, this is sci-fi, this is all hype.
Yeah.
I don't think you can dismiss this as, I mean, I'm sure there's some hype around the edges, but the idea that this does pose an existential risk, the number of really, really smart people who don't really have an incentive in sort of hyping this, to be honest. Geoffrey Hinton, he's finished his career, right? He's 79, he's retired, or 76, I'm not sure. The idea that so that we don't focus on bias and discrimination, they had to just invent an existential risk. I don't buy it. I think this is genuinely worrying. And I don't think people are waking up to the risk that some quite odd people in Silicon Valley are taking with all of our futures.
Yeah, and Geoffrey Hinton is a Nobel Prize winner from 2024. You know, his methodology in terms of how you build AI and how, you know, basically led to these LLMs. He's been doing that for decades, and he's the one who says, look, we're looking at potential existential risk. I take what Geoffrey Hinton says, the godfather of modern AI and LLMs and a Nobel Prize winner, more seriously than somebody saying, you know what, I just think it's hype. I just feel like it's hype. Well, you know what, in the late 90s, early 2000s, e-commerce was hype. Now walk down the local high street. How many businesses 20, 25 years ago are still there? They've been eaten up by digital commerce, e-commerce. I'm sure, you know, all manner of bricks and mortar businesses said that 25 years ago. Oh, it's just, well, they're not in business anymore. So no, I don't think it's just hype. You don't have a Nobel Prize winner who's, like I say, the godfather of that field saying what he said if it's just hype. The question is, where does it end up? I think that the emphasis on AGI, the idea of some kind of inorganic machine sentience, I think people like Altman, like Amadei, like Musk, they love that debate because it distracts us from the real point, which is that changes in regards to machine learning, AI, are going to have huge implications for, like I say, global, regional, and individual inequality. They will massively amp up inequality. I heard a podcast recently listening to one economist. He said, well, there'll be more utility for the average person because, of course, yeah, you know, they might not be the winners in all of this, like the multi-billionaires of Silicon Valley, but they get really good free medical advice from ChatGPT. Or they'll learn about a novel from somebody who, you know, previously you'd only get that kind of insight from, you know, a top 50 global academic of Russian literature talking to you about Tolstoy. Now you get it for free or for a small fee with ChatGPT. You know what? I mean, if you've just lost your job because you're in a white collar industry which has been gobbled up by AI, I don't think that's particularly. I don't think that's a deal that many people would want to do. And it reminds me of the kind of arguments that have been in circulation for the last 10, 15 years. Oh yeah, young people, you know, they can't get on the housing ladder. Public services are in decline. They probably won't get a state pension, but they've got iPhones. I think we're going to see something similar with regards to commercially available AI. You know, yeah, you've lost your job. Sure, there's been massive wage compression for relatively steady white-collar jobs over the last 30, 40 years. Many of those have disappeared. Sure, okay. But now when you feel unwell, you can get quite good advice for free from, you know, an LLM available from Meta or whoever. It sounds very, very familiar to me. So we should take it seriously. And I think there is a habit on the left that if you're not in control of something, then, well, you know, it doesn't matter because we can't control it. I mean, that's just not realistic. My book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism, is about a suite of technologies which are changing the world. And the one thing I got wrong, Michael, I said this time after time, it was published in 2018. The one thing I got wrong is I was very conservative about how quickly they'd come online, whether that was asteroid mining, whether that was machine learning, or whether that was some of the technology now with regards to things like longevity. You know, there's a company out there now which will soon be offering longevity therapies for pet dogs. This stuff is happening. Some of it will work, some of it won't. But if you look just purely at AI right now, it is working. It is changing things. Waymo, Michael, the self-driving cars, Waymo, have overtaken Lyft in San Francisco. But there are still people out there saying self-driving cars will never happen. It's here. Waymo has overtaken Lyft. It's going to overtake Uber in San Francisco in the next 3 or 4 years. It's here. But people say, no, it's all hype. It's not happening. It's happening. Go there. Go and look at the videos on social media of people using the product. It's happening. It's here.
Let's wrap up. We've gone over. Aaron, a pleasure as always to be joined by you for a Friday evening.
My pleasure, Michael. Hope you have a nice weekend.
I hope you guys watching also have a lovely weekend. Come back on Monday for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.
Meta or whoever, it sounds very, very familiar to me. So we should take it seriously. And I think there is a habit on the left that if you're not in control of something, then, well, it doesn't matter because we can't.